I never knew anything about you.
Right.
And I would say that probably 90% of Texas feels the same way.
Right.
You know, when this seat became vacated, there were immediately people that jumped forward and said, I want that seat.
Right.
And they've been running hard. Ted Cruz, now Dewhurst is in. Everybody knew he wanted to participate, and he finally made it official. You know, you've got all these endorsements. You know, they've been raising money. Some people don't need to raise so much money because they've already got it. Despite all those things, what is it that made you decide that you want to throw your hat or name in the hat?
Well, and some clarification on several of those things. First of all, I've been in this race for 19 months. Ted Cruz has been in this race for about 6 months. He was originally running for Attorney General of Texas because they thought David Dewhurst would move up to the Senate seat, Greg Abbott would hear, and so everyone thought it was going to be musical chairs. And I loved Ted. I was supporting him for Attorney General. I thought he was wonderful before the Supreme Court. I think as an attorney he's extraordinary. I got in this race because I looked at the U.S. Senate and I didn't see my voice. In the U.S. Senate, even though you only have to be 30 years old, we don't have a single senator under the age of 40. So that entire generation has no voice in the Senate. And in Washington, what they say is, if you don't have a voice at the table, you're probably on the menu. And I think my generation is on the menu up there. I think that our pay and our future income is on the menu when you look at how we're going to have to prop up Social Security and Medicare because of mismanagement and reallocation of what was supposed to be a trust fund. Our generation's on the menu when you look at the fact that the Department of Defense is doing all it can when it comes to Iraq, Afghanistan, and multiple other areas of engagement right now, but we're running out of people who want to enlist, and people are exhausted within the military. Our generation will be that on that list. So I looked at that, and that was a lot of concern for me. I also looked at the fact that even though women in Texas and the United States are 51% of the population, we're only 17% of the U.S. Senate. Of the 17 women in the Senate, only 5 are Republican and only 1 is considered thoroughly conservative. I know that conservative women are more than 1/100th of this population. And so it's very concerning to me that, again, my voice doesn't exist or is extremely limited in the U.S. Senate. I looked at the fact that she's also the same woman who is the only one that's really thoroughly considered pro-life in the U.S. Senate. As a pro-life woman, that's something that's very important to me, and I want the Republican Party to go forward on the pro-life message in a way that we haven't before. We've really focused a lot on when does life begin, and for me that's at conception, but the argument is going to really have to shift, and I think we need to lead the way on it. We need to quit following on these arguments on when does life end and who gets to decide and how is it decided. Now, I believe that it should end naturally and that it should be the person who's dying and their family who make this decision. I don't think it should be a government decision, but once you have the government paying for your health care, it quickly becomes a government decision. I've spent the last 5 years as a full-time caregiver for my husband's grandmother. She had a stroke. We didn't want her to have to go to a nursing home or be cared for by strangers, and so we've been giving her full-time care. I'm already doing what my generation is going to have to do, but is completely unprepared to do. And as a pro-life, conservative, constitutional conservative woman, I want to go out front and tell them, I've already done this. I've been there, I've done that. I know the joys and I know the trials, and I know it can be done. Because I know the liberals are going to look up and say, we can't afford them. And as a pro-life woman, that disturbs me. When someone's life value is based on how much they're contributing to the society financially or how much they take financially, I think that's a serious problem. We move very quickly down a very dangerous path.
And so the Obamacare end-of-life sessions.
Yes.
Now, that reminded me of like Soylent Green.
Soylent Green is people.
You know, where the guy goes in, he says, you know, I've had enough of this. I'm just going to go check out.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and what I'll say is, I think that there are some people who were involved in writing that legislation that didn't mean for it to be that way. I personally believe, as someone who thinks every person should be very empowered with their health care and talk to their doctors about everything, I think you should have those conversations with the person who was probably going to sign off on the paperwork on your whether you pull the plug or leave it there. I think those conversations are very important, but I don't think the federal government should be mandating them, regulating them, or monitoring them, and I don't think it's any of their business. I don't think it's going to make our healthcare system less complicated. I think it'll make it far more complicated, because then everyone's going to have to decide whether or not they're having the conversation with the correct doctor. I mean, you have your conversation with your primary care physician and you live in Austin, but you go up to Washington State and you have a heart attack. Well, then now the federal government has to get involved on, well, did what you say in Texas mean what it says in Washington State? I think it adds endless complications. I believe it's each person's personal responsibility to have those conversations and have them with their families and have a living will and have a trust, any number of things taken care of. But I don't think that's the federal government's job. And I think it goes beyond that, because if you look at the independent advisory board, they're independent for sure, because they don't answer to Congress, and they really don't answer to the American people. The only way they're going to be restricted is any decision they make, whether or not Congress takes the time or has the guts to pass legislation to deal with that. So I think that's a serious problem, but my generation's completely unprepared for this. We're going to take care of the largest senior population in the history of our country, on the largest debt in the history of our country, and we're completely unprepared. The liberals are ready. They've already set things in motion, and conservatives need to get those faces out front to deal with it now.
What is your plan to, you're one of, 100.
As senator? Well, I think what you start with really is repeal, repeal, repeal. Everyone for sure needs to repeal Obamacare, but there's actually a number of other pieces of legislation that we need to focus on. I think we need to make sure, first of all, that there's legislation that protects the conscience rights of healthcare workers.
So how would you present something like that?
Well, I think it'll take a team effort, and I think there are a number of people in the Senate who will be ready for that, and there are a number of people in the House already who will be ready for that. But it's going to take a team effort. It's going to take legislation that's ready, but I think instead it shouldn't be our job to constantly create legislation to fix the healthcare in America. I think healthcare is the mess that it is because government has gotten involved on so many levels and in such extraordinary ways. Really, my passion will be to repeal and roll back the ways that the federal government is already intruding into our healthcare and causing greater complications in paperwork, complications in pricing, complications in the decision-making family members can make.
I've got a friend of mine who is in the medical equipment and supply business. And we were talking, and he says, everyone's getting their cut. I said, so when you have to restock, he goes, they want their money now. So he has to pay them now. And when he has a Medicare patient come through, they have they're like a golden card that says, I get this, I get that, and then they bill, and it's 30 to 45 days later, if he's lucky, if there's not a complication. So there's this slow walk into paperwork, there's this nightmare bureaucracy. How do you resolve these issues so that it can become more efficient?
Well, I think that everything needs to begin on the most local level. I think your local community, your hometown that you live in, is far better at determining the best way to provide health care for those who are in need, who cannot provide for themselves, far better than any state bureaucrat or federal bureaucrat can. So I think it needs to be local communities taking responsibility for this. But at the same time, we have to untie their hands by rolling back legislation and requirements. I mean, things like in the Obamacare and the Medicaid mandate, states, their hands will be tied. They will have to do Medicaid the way the federal government wants. That's not going to work. What works well in Texas will not work well in New York or California or Florida. Each one of the states knows how to do this best. But at the same time, Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, sadly, has also become a tool for redistribution of wealth in America. I mean, they're taking all the money into one big pot, and then they decide how much each state gets. And then the states can kind of decide how they want to spend it. But it's going to get even tighter. I think that we really need to roll that back and let each individual state provide health care and provide the financing for those who are in greatest need in their state. If their state can't provide it, then I think they need to examine why they don't have enough income on their own taxation on the local and state level to provide for the greatest needs. Is it because they've chased off businesses with their regulatory climate or with their tax climate? They need to take personal responsibility for it.
Most people, my friend was saying, most people that come to him say that the reason that they have their benefit or their Medicare or Medicaid or whatever it is because it's owed to them. They feel that they've paid in their whole lives. Now it's my turn.
Right.
I get this.
Right, right. The hard reality on the Medicare and Social Security numbers is the average senior that's partaking in them right now actually only pays in 40% of what they end up taking out in total. So 60% of what they receive is actually a redistribution of wealth because it's taking money from people who are working at the time and then paying for Social Security or Medicare for them. So while I definitely agree with and understand people should get back what they've paid in, quite frankly, I don't think they should have been forced to pay it in the first place. And do I think they should get the money back that they've paid in? Absolutely. But when we say that we want to reform Medicare or reform Social Security, we need to take into our understanding and realization of this that people are not taking out what they've paid in. They're taking out much more than they've ever paid in.
Of course, a lot of them are convinced that they've paid in their whole lives.
Well, and what I'll tell you is you definitely have paid in probably most of your life. I mean, I've been working since I was 12, 15 years old, you know, when they could start taxing me. And so I've been paying in for a very long time, but it's not like I paid in 100% of my paycheck every time. It is a percentage. And you can actually call the federal government, and the Social Security Administration will mail you a letter every year that tells you this is how much you've paid in total this year for your Social Security. This is how much you've paid in over your working lifetime, and this is how much you can expect on a monthly basis if you retire at 62 or 65.
Right.
And so you can find out very quickly how much money you've truly paid in. Now, what we all know, and or I think a lot of people understand, is if that money instead had gone into people's 401ks, or people have been able to invest it in the stock market or in real estate or any number of things, they would have made far more money than they're ever going to get back in Social Security. So I think we need to adjust how we think about it.
Medical savings plans.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
I loved HSAs. It was a wonderful idea, and I was really disappointed when the Republican Party let it just fall out like it did again.
So I could see you possibly getting behind something like that if you were our senator.
Well, but at the same time, when you say medical savings plans, I don't think the federal government should be garnishing your wages to put it in an account for you. I think you should be able to keep your own money, and you decide how you want to invest it, how you want to spend it, where you want to put it. I don't think that, I know a lot of people say that we should roll over Social Security to private accounts. I think we should give people their money back and let them spend it how they want or invest it how they want. I think Republicans, we get into hypocrisy when we say we have to save Social Security, because Social Security is a redistribution of wealth. And it's forcing people, it's a mandate. They're requiring you to invest in your retirement. Long before the Obamacare mandate, we were requiring people to invest in their retirement. We're against that as Republicans. We don't believe in forcing people to do that. We're forcing them to buy a product. Our product is the government's version of retirement. So I think everyone should be given back every penny that they've put into it, and if they want to spend it on gold, if they want to spend it on their 401k, if they want to spend it on paying for their home so that they don't have to owe it on the future, if they want to put it in a health savings account, however they want to invest the money that they were forced to put in, I think they should have the right to do that.
Well, I think people want the right to control their money and where they put it.
I think so too.
That's a really good point.
Republicans, I think, need to quit being afraid of the idea of giving people their money back and stop forcing them to invest in the government's version of a retirement plan. It doesn't need to be restructured. People need to get back what's basically been stolen from them, because you can't opt out of Social Security. So when something's being taken by force that someone else didn't earn, that's called theft.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Theft, folks. Theft.
Well, and I mean,
government.
Without a doubt, it was theft when they took it out of the trust fund and they put it in the giant slush fund, is what I would call it.
Right.
But,
okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
I want to talk about Afghanistan. I want to talk about terrorism. You have the guys on the left. A lot of people feel that the reason that we're in the situation we're in is because of our previous actions, previous history, the way we've
interacted with other nations.
Right. Okay, but at the same time, you cannot deny that Muslim extremists are determined to bring us down and everyone who opposes them.
Right.
So how do you have dialogue? How do you come to a playing field where we can ensure safety of the people and not upset the balance with the
With
Middle
other
East or
nations,
with other
right,
nations?
right.
I mean,
Well,
how do we do that?
The Middle East doesn't need us to upset the balance. It pretty much stays imbalanced rather often, full time. And that's heartbreaking to say, but that's where it is right now. And so far, exchanging bullets hasn't changed how it works. It's just changed who's in charge repeatedly. And that breaks my heart, because seeing children die because grown-ups can't get along really upsets me. How do we change the dialogue in America, or how do we change our dialogue with the Middle East? Which one are you asking?
Let's start with America. That's the one we can control.
Well, I think the dialogue, first of all, in America has to be back to the Second Amendment. It is amazing when a populace feels equipped and empowered to defend themselves and protect their nation, what they would be willing to do, but also what a deterrent they can be to other nations. I think that it's not enough to tell people you have Second Amendment rights, but we've got to strongly encourage them. This is how you exercise them. This is how you come to a healthy realization of them. And I personally believe that it's a parent's job, that if they're going to have a gun in the home, that from birth they're teaching children there to understand this is what it is, this is how we keep it safe, this is why you shouldn't be using it, and as early as possible teaching them how to properly use it, so that if they come across one in someone else's home, they don't make a bad decision. It's not like you're going to leave your guns laying out unlocked, but someone else could. And it's your job to empower your child with the understanding of how those things work, the damages they can do, and then why they can be necessary. So I think that's very important. I think it's very important that we as a nation realize without the federal government when we are prepared on our own home front. When we're prepared for natural disasters. I mean, if you live in Galveston or in the Houston area, you know when it's hurricane season, and you know you need to get prepared, and you know what a mess it can be if you're not prepared. Sadly, in New Orleans, they didn't take that warning seriously, and it was a warning to all of us. I think it's important that we as conservatives stand up and make it a top priority to educate and empower everyone in our community on how to deal with disasters, whether they be natural or man-made, like terrorist acts. If you look at September 11th, as much as I love the men and women who served in the fire departments and in the police and all of the emergency services, it was still thousands of their fellow citizens who were pulling them out of brick and mortar, who were rescuing them, who were administering first aid when there was no one else around, when emergency services wasn't there yet. If we encourage our nation to be prepared for those sorts of things through first aid training and CPR training and how to use a handgun to defend yourself and how to detect a terrorist activity, I think we'll go much further than if we just encourage everyone to wait on FEMA to show up or wait on your local emergency services. So I think that conversation has to change. When you look at every time something has been thwarted that a terrorist has tried to do in America, look how often it was common citizens who saw that person and put a stop to what they're doing. It wasn't because the CIA was standing there when it was going to happen. So often it was the average citizen who said something is not right. I mean, you look at the plane that went down that was supposed to hit Washington, D.C. Who took it down? It was a group of citizens who said, my life is important, but greater is the freedom and the protection of the rest of this nation. Let's roll. That's what they did. They felt empowered to put a stop to what criminal behavior was going on. We need to get away from this idea, I believe, that law enforcement is the only one who can really make sure the law is enforced. So I think we need to change the conversation that way as conservatives in America. How do we change the conversation in the Middle East? I think every one of us has to spend a little bit of time thinking about what we would do if tomorrow China or Russia or any other nation decided that they didn't like how we behaved in a particular nation, and so they sent their army into our nation to adjust the elections or deal with anyone they considered an insurgent. It's a difficult conversation, but I think we have to seriously think about how would we respond if it was our country after 10 years, if another nation was here after we asked for temporary help and 10 years later they were still there.
Well, I wouldn't want anyone here.
Right.
Right. But
we have to think about that conversation.
Okay, so if we know that there's Hezbollah camps in northern Mexico, right across the border.
Yep. The change of the face of the drug war has changed, and the attitudes of the drug war has changed. They've moved to beheadings, which has been very much a Middle Eastern behavior, not a Latin American behavior historically.
Right. Well, historically, you know, the Spanish came in, they butchered people.
They did.
But I would say this. Everyone's talking about, and now we're going to get into what we're all about.
Right.
You know, everyone talks about border security.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone talks about immigration reform. I haven't heard anyone explain in any sort of depth or detail their thought process on how they might improve or provide solutions to those huge issues. They've been swept under the rug.
Right.
And we believe the Hispanic community wants to know where you stand on that.
Right. Okay, so which one do you want to start
Either
with?
one. I want to do them both.
Okay, great.
You do it however you want to do
Okay.
it. We just want to know.
Well, starting with immigration, I'm very leery of the words comprehensive reform on anything. So often when it becomes comprehensive, it's thousands of pages long. It usually means far more bureaucrats and far more agencies, and I really have a problem with that. We really do have a very good system. I believe the biggest problem is it's been poorly funded, and frequently its funding has been stolen to do whatever is the fashionable piece of legislation or enforcement at that time. A perfect example is recently ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, was told by the people at the top, we're having to pull your funding, and so from now on we're gonna let individual ICE agents decide who they want to take in and report and whether they just want to let someone go. That's a little odd that they've lost funding and that we don't have enough money when the Department of Agriculture has enough money to raid dairy farms for raw milk, and the Department of Education has enough funding to raid schools for education materials they disagree with. So I don't think we have a funding problem. I don't think we have a proper legislation problem. I think we have a priorities problem. And I think that Congress really seriously needs to find a way to make sure that every penny that's supposed to be allocated for immigration stays there and cannot be transferred to any other program or fund. Let them be able to do fully their job. As for me, at one time I was a fence person, and I understood the arguments, but the more I think about it and the more I pray about it and study and read, I'm more of a boots-on-the-ground person. I think the fence will spend billions of dollars, but I'd much rather spend billions of dollars putting people to work in the United States, helping protect the border and helping protect the people who live on the border. I'd much rather that be used for permanent jobs, protecting this nation, than temporary jobs, putting up a wall that can be torn down, blown up, or burrowed under, or flown over. So I'm for boots on the ground. I believe that it's ideal to hire people who live most locally because that's their home, that's where their family is. They're going to be far more invested in making sure those laws are enforced and that it's safe than someone that's been transferred from another part of the country to watch that part of the border temporarily and then go back to where home might be. So boots on the ground, as local as possible. I believe that the funding needs to be far more local than it is. I think that we have a huge system with the Department of Homeland Security where more money is lost in bureaucracy than is actually truly being invested in protecting the border and protecting our nation, whether it's the southern border or the northern border or the ports that we have, the waters. So I think that we can really dramatically reduce how much we spend in bureaucracy and shrink agencies and limit the number of agencies and really put the money in the states and find out from them what is the best way. Because how to protect the Texas border is going to be very different from the California border, Arizona, New Mexico. I think each of those governors has far better ideas, and I think the local sheriffs and law enforcement has far better ideas on how that money needs to be spent.
Right, but they can't do anything about it. They can't make it happen.
Oh, yeah. No, I absolutely hear you. And so I think, in that sense, I think that there's much we can do in legislation
like what?
To help that. I think that truly allocating money specifically to go to the border sheriffs in this state, the border sheriffs in that state. But if you want to really get far more Republican, I think, than that, you quit taking the money, you let the states keep the money that they've collected in taxes and let them allocate it according to what level is most important. Do they think drones will be most effective in that area? Because, I mean, there's some things you can't cover on foot. Do they think that, boots on the ground will be more effective? Do they think infrared imaging will be far more effective?
So if I'm reading you right, what you're saying is it's all about funding.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is about funding, yes.
Okay, so do we know what it would cost? How do we figure out,
Everyone has very different estimates. I know that the most recent piece of legislation supported by John McCain, and I'm forgetting who his co-author was, included a border fence, and they were saying closer to like $350 billion to cover all of that. I say remove the border fence, and if we want to spend that much money on defending the borders with boots on the ground and proper technology and proper equipment for everyone on fighting that fight, then I'm really for that. I don't think changing the laws is necessary. We have a really good system. It's been poorly funded. It's been poorly allocated. Quit redirecting the money. Leave it where it's supposed to be and give them time to do their job.
In my presentation earlier, I mentioned something that Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst had mentioned about his plan.
Right.
What did you think about that, and is that feasible?
I think it is possible. I think it's going to take a lot of work selling it to a lot of people. The reality is when we talk about elections, I know a lot of people talk about a great American awakening happening right now, but the reality is in the last election, less than 25% of people who are eligible to vote bothered to vote, and that was in the general election. If you look at primaries, it's people who are far more committed to their causes, because I hate the word extreme. I think it's been poorly used as a word. The people who are the most anti-immigration or the most isolationist or the most angry about illegal immigration are far more likely to vote in a primary than a person who may be more moderate on the issue. If you're going to sell Americans on getting legislators in who will do that sort of program, you have to basically go on a sales tour explaining what it means and why it would work and getting their feedback and asking them, how do you see this working? Do you think 2 years is the best visa? Do you think 1 year? The reality is that most people don't realize most of the people who are here illegally aren't here because they swam or ran or flew over a border. It's because they overstayed a visa, and we are not properly funded in immigration services to keep track of them and enforce that law. So we have plenty of visas. We have plenty of opportunities for visas. We seriously are lacking on the ability to enforce people who've stayed more than they should. So I think it's possible as a plan, but again, I think we have a really great program. We haven't properly funded it.
Enforce what's on the books now.
Enforce what's on the books, and this wouldn't be nearly the problem that it is, but also fund what's on the books.
Earlier we were talking about your contacts or your
My relationships.
Your relationships
Right.
with the Hispanic community and how personal it was to you and why you're so passionate about immigration and border security. To those people watching, considering who to vote for, Hispanics specifically, why would they vote for you?
I think that's a perfectly fair question. What I understand and what I believe from having these relationships we've talked about, the Hispanic community is very conservative spiritually, very conservative when it comes to immigration, when it comes to life issues, when it comes to the drug war, when it comes to employment, when it comes to, gosh, just about everything when it comes to the government, the military, very conservative. I think when we have these conversations, they find that in me as well. I think that they're an extraordinary group of people in how committed they are to family and relationships and sticking together through the most difficult times, and that's something I can definitely relate to from my own family and the extraordinary issues we've had growing up and with health care and job loss and extraordinary difficulty in family. I think they're looking for someone who has a similar voice. And I think that people in the Hispanic community understand that you don't have to be the same skin color or have the same last name to have a similar voice. I think the people in the Hispanic community are way more intelligent than most liberals give them credit for when it comes to their voting and who they want to have represent them. And I think they understand that just because someone's skin color is the same doesn't mean they're going to believe the same as you. I mean, if someone's skin color was the same and that meant automatically you believe the same as them, then Hugo Chavez would be on the top of everyone's list in the Hispanic community. He's not. And I think that the Republican Party also needs to get past this idea that only someone with a Hispanic last name could ever get the Hispanic vote. I think we have to move beyond that idea because there's plenty of people with Hispanic last names who have very socialist and communist ideas and behaviors. So I think it's about relationship. I think it's about interacting with the community and talking to people, and that's through video like this. It's through but I think more it's one-on-one, and that's why I've worked really hard. I've been to 250 different meetings, events, and rallies in the last 18 months, looking to reach people and connect with them. And my goal is to visit every single county in the state and visit voters in every single county to talk to them about what's important and build that relationship and let them interview me like you're doing and find out if I'm the best one for them. But I think when we look at the values are the same, and that's important to me.
One last thing. We talked briefly about the pockets, the deep pockets of some of the candidates.
Yeah.
What is it going to take to win as far as a dollar amount, and how are you coming along there? I mean, people want to know that.
Oh, absolutely.
Am I going to...
am I supporting a winning team, or am I throwing my dollar away?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely understandable. Well, here's what I'll tell you is all the consultants tell you that you have to spend 10 to 20 million in Texas, but imagine that, the guys who make that money telling you you need to spend a lot of money to win. I don't think it's going to take 10 to 20 million. I really don't. What I think it's going to take is face time and relationship, and I'm willing to work very hard. I've traveled all over the state. In 2010, there were a lot of candidates who started taking money, and they held on to that money. I disagreed with that because I saw so many races, especially in the Austin area, that were lost by 12 votes, that I wonder if that $1 million hadn't been sitting in that candidate's coffers and had been helping these other candidates, what a difference that would have made. So I spent my own money the whole time, and I don't have very much. My husband and I did our taxes last year, and I was working part-time, and I made $14,000 last year, and I've spent $12,000 on this campaign. So talking about having skin in the game, proportionally, I think I have more than most of the other candidates. Do I have the big bucks behind me? No, not right now, I don't. And when it comes to endorsements, those are very tricky things. Everyone who's given an endorsement in this race did not interview every candidate in the race. I used to think they did, and I used to trust endorsements. I don't anymore. They seriously look at, number one, how much money do you have and how much money will you raise? And I think that's a shame because I've seen the best government money can buy, and I'm not impressed. So I'm willing to work hard. I don't spend my money on hotels. I sleep in my friends' houses and on couches with supporters, and I drive home that night from many programs to save that money. All of my money really goes to gas and helping get literature out to people, and occasionally some food. I really don't want to waste someone else's money, and I think that many times there is waste in this industry, because that's what politics is, it's an industry. So I'm willing to work harder. I'm willing to spend people's money better than I think others are. I mean, I went to 180 programs on $7,000. I'd like to see that government efficiency, actually.
Yeah.